Hey guys, welcome back to the Art of Healing podcast. My name is Tanya and I am a certified trauma-informed life coach supporting individuals on their journey of metamorphosis and personal alchemy. And in today's episode, I want to talk all about that nagging voice, that monkey on your shoulder. We all have it. The voice of the inner critic. Let's get into it. Now, the reason I want to speak about this topic today is twofold. One, I struggle a lot, honestly, with the voice of my own inner critic. I have an extremely loud inner critic. And so this is a topic that's, very, very dear to my heart as a coach and also as someone that has gone through and it continues to go through my own self-development and healing journey. I've come to realize that much of the time we are so unaware of our thoughts. We don't pay that much attention to the array of thoughts that are living rent-free in our minds. Voices that can distract us, voices that can paralyze us, voices that can overstimulate us. And a lot of the time, these voices are not even our own, especially when it comes to the voice of the inner critic. This is something I've realized through most, if not all, of my coaching clients. In my experience, the voice of the inner critic does not belong to the true self. And often, the voice of the inner critic are actually just echoes of what we have heard from the past, generally from our early developmental stages of life. And these are echoes and thoughts and ideas and concepts and things that we've heard our caregivers say. But before I get into that, I want to talk about what is the voice of the inner critic. To begin with, I actually want to say that the voice of the inner critic is not all bad. And actually, the voice of the inner critic is a survival response. Ultimately, this voice is really responsible for our survival and advising us on whether it thinks we are in danger or not. So ultimately, the voice of your inner critic is trying to keep you out of danger, is assessing if there's a threat in your environment, and is ultimately doing what it can to keep you safe. And because it's a survival response, it can feel very hard to control and very, very hard to change, because ultimately it is there for your safety. It's a safety mechanism. It's that knee-jerk reaction when it feels it's threatened. And so, it's not about silencing the voice of the inner critic or killing the voice of the inner critic or completely diminishing this voice, because some part of these thoughts and ideas may actually be helpful for you, may actually provide you some discernment or better help you in moving toward what you actually want in a way that feels safe and comfortable for you. However, there are points where this voice can become harmful. And that's what I want to look at today, the harmful voice of the inner critic. So I want to link the inner critic to the body, because when we think of the inner critic as a survival response or a threat response, this really shows up in the body. So you might notice, you're at work and, trying to respond to an email with a lot of important stakeholders, and you're not sure what to say. And, this might trigger that voice that might be telling you, like, don't say the wrong thing, or this has to be perfect, or what will people think if you don't say the right thing? And you might notice some somatic symptoms, some physiological symptoms arising in your body. You might begin to sweat. You might begin to start breathing very quickly. You might feel very constricted in your body. You might lose your appetite. So nothing else is important but the task at hand, which might seem very trivial if it's just an email or something along those lines. But that voice of the inner critic in some essence is sensing a threat, is sensing danger. And having the awareness, the somatic awareness, really recognizing and noticing what happens to your body when you observe the voice of the inner critic is going to be a really important step that we go into later in addressing how to actually soothe this voice and how to come back to a state of safety, how to come back to a state of rationality, which is something the voice of the inner critic really doesn't have. So we'll come back to these physiological signs later and how to use the awareness of your body to actually support you in soothing these thoughts. So I want to start with the origins of this voice of the inner critic and how it develops and why it might be stronger in some individuals and not so strong in others. Now, as I said before, the voice of the inner critic can either be helpful or it can be harmful. Now, generally speaking, the voice of the inner critic often reflects the echoes of what we might have heard in childhood from our caregivers. Children that grow up with overly critical and judgmental parents that really scrutinize everything that they do without balancing it out with recognition, praise, validation, are likely going to grow up to be individuals that have internalized those critical voices and become themselves highly judgmental and critical. And these are the individuals that are likely to have very harmful inner critics. The voice of their inner critic is very harmful, destructive, and damaging to themselves. So I just want to really take note of the link here between early childhood, the role of your caregivers, and how the voice of the inner critic is associated to them, because it has everything to do with them. Like I was saying before, with most of my coaching clients, the voice of their inner critic does not reflect at all the essence of their true self. And it's been very interesting for me as a coach to observe this, because there are some thoughts that they will express and will say conversationally, just ideas that they have about themselves, thoughts that are there about particular situations that they might be sharing with me, where I have to go, wait a minute, whose voice is this? Because it is not the voice of this person's true self. And so it's been a really interesting process to work with the individuals I work with to identify whose voice is this really? And much of the time, it's the voice of a mother, it's a voice of a father, it's a voice of a babysitter, it's the voice of a nanny, it's the voice of an older sibling, a very crucial caregiver that was part of your life at a very early age. And so it's so important to separate these voices out. Not necessarily to get rid of them. I'm not sure it's actually possible to get rid of these voices, but it is possible to separate them out, to have clarity around whose voice is that? Is it relevant to me now? And whose voice do I really want to listen to? Is this a voice I want to continue listening to? Is this a voice that is helping me? Or is this a voice that is stopping me from growing, that is stopping me from living out my dreams, that is stopping me from being in integrity with who I am, with living the life I desire to live? So I'm quite passionate about this topic because I'm coming to realize that what stops most of us from attaining what it is we really want in life, from actualizing our dreams, are destructive thoughts. And these destructive thoughts often come from the inner critic. Guys, if you're enjoying this episode of the Art of Healing podcast, I would love if you could take a few minutes to actually rate the show 5 stars, whether you're on Spotify or listening to this on Apple or wherever you're streaming this. This is a completely free show, and I produce it from head to toe, from the filming to the post-production to the graphics to everything, because I love to talk about these topics. And if you get value from this show, please take a minute to show your gratitude and appreciation by rating the show, giving it 5 stars, because that really tells the algorithms in algorithm land that this is a podcast that other people might really benefit from listening to. If you're watching this on YouTube, do be sure to give the video a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can be up to date with all the latest content as soon as it comes out. All right, guys, enough of that. Let's get back to the podcast. Now, I think it's also important to go over the different archetypes of the inner critic, because the inner critic can show up differently in everybody. For me, for example, as I mentioned before, I have a very strong inner critic, and my inner critic often shows up as a perfectionist, where I have to be perfect at everything to such a detrimental degree at times that it can lead me, my perfectionist can lead me to burnout, can lead me to being a workaholic, can lead me to undermining my own value and undermining my confidence and undermining my worth. For my inner critic perfectionist, nothing is ever good enough. There's always something wrong with everything that I do, and that inner perfectionist isn't able to see or recognize when I've done a good job. This makes it so difficult for me to be a content creator, and this is why I show up so inconsistently online when I am in post-production editing of every single piece of content. The voice of my inner critic is at its loudest, telling me how shit everything I'm doing and saying is. It's also telling me and scrutinizing what I should have said, what I shouldn't have said. Does this make sense? Will people understand this? Everyone's gonna think that you are full of crap, whatever, it's so loud, and it is very difficult for me to manage this voice, especially in my work. It's something I'm definitely actively working on. And, often the archetype of the perfectionist is also, I think, strongly associated to imposter syndrome. So you might be a high achiever like I am, and high achievers, high functioning high achievers usually have a very, very strong perfectionist inner critic and likely suffer to a high degree from imposter syndrome, where they always think they're not good enough, where we always think we are an imposter and we will be found out to be frauds. And so you're always climbing, you're always trying to get that next achievement. In my case, I'm on this path of continuous study, of continuous education, because I'm a coach and not a psychotherapist, for example. I feel like I need to prove myself that I'm good enough to do what I'm doing. So I'm constantly in training. I'm constantly in continuous education. I'm continuously being certified in the next thing to better myself. And it's very difficult for me to know when to stop. And for my perfectionist, there is no we can stop here, because we are never good enough. So that's an example of how the perfectionist might show up. If your inner critic also has that perfectionist archetype. Some of the other inner critic archetypes are the control freak or the protector, and the control freak is a voice that might show up that tells you that's too dangerous, that's too risky, that's not safe enough, we can't do this because then this will happen and that's very dangerous. This is a voice that does not allow you to take healthy, calculated risks. And with this voice, it can often feel like you are stuck or stagnant. You are stuck in your comfort zone, the comfort zone that the control freak will not let you leave, because outside of the comfort zone, everything is a danger. Everything is a threat. We've never experienced what's on the other side of our comfort zone, so it cannot be safe. And with the control freak, it not only seeks control of your affairs, it can actually overstep boundaries and begin and try to control other people's lives as a means of, essentially keeping other people safe, but it doesn't take into consideration the boundaries of other people. So the control freak can also be in violation of other people's boundaries. It also, is very resistant to change. It's very resistant to new opportunities. This inner critic likes routine, likes things to stay the same, and can feel extremely threatened with anything changing that they are not in control of. This is the voice that will say, stay in your comfort zone to stay safe. To some degree, you can see the positive intent with this voice, but it's also very damaging because change is part of life and it is part of growth and development. And with this voice, if this is the voice of your inner critic, you really run the risk of stagnancy, feeling stuck, feeling extremely unsatisfied with where you are, but also feeling terrified to move away from where you are. Another archetype of the inner critic is, of course, the people pleaser. Another one that is very, very fond of me and something that I used to really be a voice that navigated my ship, so to speak. The voice of the inner critic that shows up as a people pleaser is extremely concerned with connection, with validation, and with not being rejected or ostracized. It is terrified of not belonging. It is terrified of abandonment. It is terrified of being alone. And it will do whatever it can, even if it means you end up sacrificing who you really are and pretending to be something you're not, simply to conform to everybody else around you as a means of belonging. The people pleaser relies heavily on external validation. It cares very much what everybody else thinks and cares very little of what you think about yourself. In fact, it will not allow you to act on what you actually want for yourself. It also has a lot of difficulty in saying no, even at the expense of your personal well-being. This is a very self-destructive space, and when you have a strong people pleaser inner critic, you can really risk losing a sense of identity, not having a real strong sense of self. You simply kind of mirror everybody around you and can really risk not having a strong connection to yourself, a strong connection to your own internal voice. Another archetype of the inner critic is the over-analyzer. This archetype can often have you be in these states of analysis paralysis. You can often be over-intellectualizing everything. You might struggle with decisiveness, with the fear of making the wrong choice, so you kind of just stay stuck and kind of ruminating. A big part of this archetype is rumination, where you are ruminating and thinking of every possibility, every option. You play it out in your head. You're playing out future scenarios that have never happened. You're playing out past scenarios that have happened and trying to figure out every minute detail to the point of such overwhelm or such overstimulation that you may become paralyzed. The overthinker also has a tendency to focus on all the negative outcomes. Again, because this is a survival instinct, it is trying to assess all the threat, all the danger. There are, as you can tell, a lot of archetypes of the inner critic. It can, as I mentioned before, it shows up in a plethora of ways. I'm going to end with the comparer, okay? The comparer archetype is an inner voice that is constantly comparing you, your behaviors, your actions, what you do to everybody else around you. The voice of the comparer will usually degrade yourself, put yourself in an inferior position, will make you think that you are wrong or you are bad or you did something wrong. It also measures your worth on external achievements. And it's also, even if you have achieved something, it tends to overlook those achievements and kind of say, well, Sally achieved that. We haven't achieved that yet, so we're not good enough. We're not worthy. We'll never be enough. The comparer often will say we are not enough. It constantly feels inadequate. It constantly feels wrong. And the comparer, runs the risk of leading you to feel highly envious or highly jealous of your peers, of your friends, of family members, of colleagues. And it's also riddled with so much self-doubt. So as you can see, guys, even just going through all of these archetypes, it's a heavy load. These voices can be so harmful, and it's a very difficult process of unraveling and untangling yourself from the grips of these voices. But I want to say, you do not have to be controlled by the voice of your inner critic. There are ways to soothe these voices, and this is such a powerful process. It can be completely life-changing. I kid you not, it's very life-changing. It's work that I love to do, and I'm going to tell you how I do that with my clients and with myself. I'm going to share that with you because this is something you can do on your own at home. And what it begins with is awareness. Just like everything else, awareness is key. And I'm going to couple that with a lot of self-reflection. You want to know when your inner critic is triggered. And if it's hard for you, like if you get into those states of analysis paralysis, if you get into those states like with me when I'm in this perfectionist mode, I'm barely conscious, it can be very difficult to step back and bring some presence into the space. But maybe you might notice, hey, I haven't eaten today. And that might be a sign for you to stop and be like, wait a minute. Usually it's when my inner critic is at its most active that I stop eating. Let me take a moment to pause to consider what my thought space has been like today. That's how I might start this process of awareness. So the body can be very, very useful considering the physiological symptoms associated to your inner critic. Maybe it's insomnia. A lot of the time when we have the voices of the inner critic in our head, we have trouble sleeping because we are constantly trying to assess a situation, or maybe, these strong voices of judgment of like, oh, I can't believe you did that. How could you say that? You looked stupid or sound stupid in that meeting. Like these voices, these thoughts can play on repeat, and it might stop us from sleeping. It might stop us from eating. Whatever it is, you want to notice the physiological symptoms. And when you do, here is your opportunity to step back and ask yourself, whose voice is this? This is my money question. This is my number one question that I like to use with myself and with all of my clients. When they are speaking to me and it's very self-critical, I will ask them, whose voice is that? Is it your voice? And if not, whose voice is it? When did you first hear this voice? How old were you when you first remember hearing this voice? Who used to say these exact words to you? Once you can start to identify whose voice the inner critic belongs to, you can start separating that voice out. This is the first step in the process. Recognizing and bringing awareness to when the voice is showing up, then asking yourself, whose voice is this? The next thing I recommend doing is writing down all the thoughts, all the criticisms, all the judgments, all of the voices that you keep hearing. Write them down on a piece of paper. This is very powerful. Sometimes just through the act of reading these thoughts and these ideas, you realize how irrational they are. Again, because these are thoughts that are determined by your threat response and your survival instincts, usually they are completely irrational. And sometimes creating some space with these thoughts, getting them on paper and out of your head, reading them, you kind of go, oh, this is stupid. This is really stupid. Now, if you don't have that, if you really believe these thoughts, the next thing that is going to be important for you to ask yourself is, are these thoughts helpful to me or are they harmful? Some of the thoughts may be helpful. Some of the thoughts might be supportive in your endeavors. In other situations, it can be very damaging, self-degrading, self-destructive, and that's what you want to be very much questioning. Are these thoughts helpful or harmful? If by this stage you haven't neutralized the voices, if by this stage you haven't soothed yourself and kind of regulated your emotions, regulated the voices, and brought yourself back down to a state of calm, and usually you'll notice once you've soothed those voices, your body will feel more calm. You might, you won't have knots in your belly. You might not be sweating. You might lay back in your chair. You might have leaned back and feel more calm. You might be breathing more deeply. If this isn't happening and you're still in the stress state, you might need to start countering these voices with the voice of your true self. And this is going to look like taking that list of thoughts, the irrational thoughts, and writing out the thoughts that are logical and true. If this is difficult for you, I would encourage you to work with someone. I would encourage you to talk to a close friend, talk to a coach, talk to a therapist to help you access your rational, logical mind, to access your true self, to access your essence, because this is very important to access your voice. Where is your voice in all of this? Where's the voice that says, actually, Tanya, this video is really good. I don't hear anybody else talking about these. Yes, it might be scary to put this out on a public, in the public arena, but maybe it's going to connect with a few people that really need to hear it. Okay, that's the voice of my true self, my essence, that counters the voice of, Tanya, you're spitting garbage, nobody's gonna listen to this, nobody cares what you have to say. It's not about diminishing that inner critical voice, though I would love to, but in reality, it's not possible for me. Maybe it's possible for you. For me, it is not. And what I have to do to manage that is strengthen my own inner voice, the voice of my true self, the voice of my higher self, the voice of my resourced, safe self, the voice of my confident self. In this strategy of healing or of managing your inner critic, I am encouraging you to strengthen your true voice, to strengthen your authentic voice. This is maybe going to be challenging if you weren't raised in an environment where you were recognized or encouraged or praised. It can be very, very difficult to strengthen that voice. And if you find this to be challenging, there is help. There is support. There are people that can help you with this, and you deserve it. You deserve that help. You deserve support. You deserve to have access to the voice of your true self. And it's about bloody time, okay? If you resonated with this video and if this is something you need help with, you can reach out to me. There's going to be a link in the description box. You can book a free coaching discovery call with me. We can explore some of these topics. We can explore some of these concepts. We can explore you. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I've really enjoyed talking about the inner critic. And I think my own inner critic is feeling very in the spotlight and possibly a little bit confused, which I'm going to take as a very positive sign that maybe it's also feeling a little bit soothed through this podcast. Let me know how your inner critic is feeling listening to this. What do you notice about your own inner critic as you've taken in this episode? What is it feeling? Does it also feel in the spotlight? Does it feel soothed? Does it feel a little triggered? I would be very curious to know. And yeah, feel free to reach out, leave a comment, send me an email, connect with me on all the socials. Let me know if this topic resonates with you. And if there's a topic you would like me to speak on, let me know. I would be so open to your feedback and suggestions. All right, guys, I'm going to stop rambling now. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, peace out.